morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Pope Fiction with Eileen and Lindsay. Today, we'll be talking about Pope Joan.
This popular legend depicts Pope Joan as the only female who's ascended the Roman Catholic Church between 855 AD and 858 AD.
In addition to explaining the story itself, we will address why it existed.
Fasten your seatbelts, boys and girls, as we speed you through another episode of Pope Fiction.
The story begins with the birth of Joan in Frankland, which is currently modern-day Germany, during the Dark Ages around 810 AD.
Joan's father, who was a priest at the time, was zealously opposed to her acquiring any sorts of education as she grew.
Please elaborate for our viewers, Eileen.
Okay. Well, during the early 800s, it was unnatural for girls and women to hold positions in society that required a good education. They mainly acted as a mother while also performing household duties. Expecting a woman to do so was not uncommon. For example, Emperor Augustus and his daughter Julia. According to PBS, Julia was a vivacious woman with a sharp tongue. However, Augustus was traditional and insisted that Julia spin and weave like plebeian women to demonstrate her wifely virtues.
Perfectly said, Eileen, but not to worry, folks. Joan still got an education. It was said that a scholar stopped at Joan's house to rest during his journey to the Scola and Fulda, which can be thought of as a modern-day Catholic school. While staying at Joan's, the visitor ended up teaching the young girl how to read and reason. Following his departure, the scholar arranged for Joan to go to the Scola.
Now, it's important to recognize that the Scola would have only been for boys due to society's view of women as previously mentioned. In order to be admitted, Joan had to disguise herself as a man and took on the name John Anglicus.
While at the Scola, Joan, who was rumored to have fallen in love with a monk and eventually left the institution to follow this monk on a pilgrimage to Rome. While roaming the countryside, Joan makes a name for herself by applying the medical knowledge she acquired both at the Scola and during her travels. After some time of helping only commoners, Joan is employed when the Pope falls tragically ill. While caring for the Pope, Joan gains the ruler's trust and becomes his confidant.
The Pope eventually dies from an illness, and Joan is easily elected to the papacy due to her previous relations with the now deceased ruler. During this time, she is impregnated by an unknown...
How did she hide that baby bump?
If you were patient and only listened, I was just about to answer that exact question. As I was saying, she was impregnated by an unknown individual and hides her stomach under her bulky robes. The pregnancy is only discovered when she takes place in a procession and during so gives birth to a child. Following this scene, there are two equally recognized endings to the myth. 1, Joan dies during childbirth, or 2, she survives childbirth but is taken and stoned to death for deceiving everyone. But who cares, it's only fiction.
While the story of Pope Joan is mere fiction, it's important to consider why the myth was created, specifically what cultural, religious, and historical values play a part in this popular folktale. Join us after the break to discover the reasoning behind the myth.
Welcome back to Pope Fiction. Right now we're going to discuss the various reasons why the myth existed.
So obviously we know that Pope Joan is a myth, and it's been widely discredited by historians and even the Vatican. There are several reasons why it's been demoted to a legend, one being the inconsistency of records. Joan was thought to have reigned between 855 and 858 AD, but records of her papacy did not start until the early 1300s. There is a full 500-year gap between, which some theorists claim that the church had destroyed the records, but most historians agree that because of this discrepancy, it only contributes to the fact that it's a myth.
But why did the story exist in the first place? There are many different explanations of why it existed, and we're going to explain some of them. One of the explanations for the myth is that the disgruntled monks of the church were irate towards the succession of Pope Johns, all of which were seen as weak and effeminate. It is believed that they created the myth as a satirical piece to degrade the papacy. Women in Rome were given more opportunities to thrive compared to other empires and kingdoms at the time, but they were still seen as inferior to men. This is evidenced in how women could inherit property, but they could have no control over it because they were thought to have weak judgment and did not have the capability to maintain the property. Assigning the role of Pope to a woman essentially humiliated the entire Roman Catholic Church because of the inferiority of women.
Another explanation that floats around is that Protestants used the myth as propaganda against the papacy. According to Stanford University, during the Reformation in the 16th century, the Catholic Church began to deny the existence of Pope Joan. However, at the same time, Protestant writers insisted on her reality, primarily because the existence of a female pope was a convenient piece of anti-Catholic propaganda.
A third explanation for the myth is that it's a cautionary tale told to girls to warn them against wanting anything that was above them. To aspire to anything greater would result in being exposed and humiliated like Pope Joan. Women in Rome, while they were educated and managed the household, never wielded actual power in government because they could not vote. The only thing that women could use was their influence over their husbands.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Pope Fiction, and remember,